we start in relationship afraid. Like we should just be aware of it. We start afraid. But Jonathan, it's all feels good and it's butterflies and excitement. It's all supposed to be sunshine and rainbows and angels singing. Ah, no. We all have fear inside us. That little 6-year-old is afraid. So the basics should be to identify that instead of stuffing it.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Nourished Inside Out. I'm here with Jonathon Aslay today, and he is the focus of one of America's leading midlife dating coaches, and he has a lot of experience in the dating world. He talks about what it truly means to love. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jonathon.
Well, thank you for having me, Annette. I really am excited about this.
Absolutely. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you came about to become a dating coach?
After turning 40 and going through a divorce, which was almost 20 years ago, I found myself back in the dating marketplace. And I thought, oh, it's just going to be so simple, like online dating. It was going to be so simple. You just plug in exactly what you want and someone would magically appear. And I went on a date with a woman, great first date, but something wasn't right. And then a couple days later, another woman, great date, something wasn't right. And a couple days later, another woman, great date, something wasn't right. And I realized after a year and over 100 first dates, the problem was me. I was the common denominator. And so I realized that, it might behoove me to do some research and some understanding about dating and relationships. But what was fascinating was I was communicating with so many women, and a lot of times I wasn't even going on dates. I was just talking to them on the phone, and they would ask my advice. Hey, Jonathan, would you look at my dating profile and help me make it better?
Wow.
So I'd look at their profile, help them make it better. And then I'd get calls like a month later. Jonathan, I met this guy. Would you look at his profile and tell me what you think about him? And so I'd give my insight based on what I saw in a man's profile. And all of a sudden, I found myself coaching women. I was doing more coaching than I was dating, partially because I was also deeply wounded after my divorce. And a lot of the communication I had was a lot of trauma. It was a lot of therapy, but it wasn't therapy. It was like talking to them and talking about my pain and hearing them share about their pain. There was an effective therapy going on. So it kind of had this dual event. I found myself becoming a dating and relationship coach, but I was also doing therapy at the same time. Now, I don't mean legitimate therapy. It was therapeutic to do what I was doing.
Wow, that's incredible. It's one thing to go into a career, but another thing to do it based off personal experiences.
Yeah.
Something I really want to talk about today, because I've actually went through a divorce myself. I would love to talk about dating after divorce because that is a whole nother ball game. Like you said, you get married and then you build this life with someone for a certain amount of years, and then it's kind of back to square one once you get a divorce. Can you
Yeah.
explain how your process was like?
Well, this is a great question. And, there's when the minute you merge a life with another human being and you go through a divorce, that's an effective, cutting the cord, if you will. It's the unraveling of the tapestry you had with a life with another human being. And I'm a big proponent after learning this the hard way, because when I was online dating and I was going of date after date after date, it was because I had a hole inside of me that needed to be filled. And
Mm,
so online dating for me was an addiction. What I recognized was I had to reinvent myself. I had to learn who I was outside of a marriage. And that unraveling of the tapestry meant I had to learn who I was outside of my relationship, outside of my past experiences. And that's where personal development, self help, and spiritual work and therapy, legitimate therapy, not talking to women on the phone all day long therapy, legitimate therapy to really find out who I was outside of a relationship so I could actually show up in a relationship in a much more healthier way.
wow, that's great. What are some challenges that you experienced after the fact? Because I know you said you were going on dating apps and women were actually coming to you for advices, but What challenges did you come across personally that you had to work over?
Oh my God, the list is long. First, I was going through somewhat of a contentious divorce. So there was the emotional trauma I was experiencing having to navigate the divorce with a spouse where there was some contention. And let me just be clear for the audience. I wasn't a model husband. I was very unconscious in my 20s when I got married, which kind of, by the time I hit 30, I was very self absorbed. I was really hyper focused on my professional life. So I wasn't a good husband, and that's what caused the divorce. Some of the other things that went on in my life at that time was navigating alimony, child support, visitation, all of those
Mm.
particular things, going through a divorce and having to navigate a life where we weren't a team anymore. We were adversaries with one another. And that was challenging, even from a dating perspective. Certainly, there was a gigantic financial challenge that I was navigating life, having to scale back my lifestyle substantially. It was effectively, divorce can be financially very traumatic to couples who, it's hard enough making a life with two people have same income, but now you have that split. And that was a challenge to having to navigate. Also, everybody else out there who's divorced, like if you're in midlife, and I was in my 40s when I went through a divorce, there's other divorced people and they have their own challenges and traumas. We call it baggage, but it's really luggage that we all have. So just even navigating some of that was a challenge. And most important, I really didn't even know what I wanted. I knew I wanted
Mm.
companionship. I knew I wanted connection. I knew I wanted sex. But for the longest time, I didn't know if I wanted commitment. I wanted the benefits, but I didn't want to, please forgive the analogy. I didn't want to buy the cow. I wanted to get the milk for free. And please, again, very crude analogy. There were a lot of emotional challenges those early years after my divorce. And now I coach women, by the way. I talk to women, helping them understand the types of men who are relationship ready versus those that are just seeking that temporary fix.
Wow, that's all great advice. You just said that you help women understand what relationship ready men are and what non relationship ready men are. Can you go into the two different types and explain them?
Sure, this is a great question. So, the way I view relationship readiness is where a person's desire for a relationship, their capacity to give and receive love, and their vision for a future exceeds the fear and the pain, past pains they might have. So, for example, right after my divorce, a lot of emotional pain, a lot of fear. That fear exceeded my desire, my capacity, and my vision. So
Mhm.
the fear wins out, the pain wins out, even though I might want that companionship, connection, and sex, but the fear and the pain exceeded it. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, the differentiating between the desire, capacity, and vision exceeds it is usually in direct relationship to how much healing we've done over our fears, our pains, our past hurts. And sadly, most humans do very little work to heal their childhood wounds or traumas that they've experienced in life. So, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So, why do second marriages fail at a 65% rate and third marriages end at a 75% rate?
Mhm.
Because their capacity, their desire, and vision has been exceeded. The pain and fear exceeds that desire, capacity, and vision.
That's so true what you said, though. We don't take the time to heal those past wounds, whether
Yeah.
it's from childhood or from relationships. I know when I was in my last relationship with my ex husband, I brought a lot of baggage from my childhood and a lot of trauma, expecting things to just get fixed with a snap of your fingers.
Yeah.
It's funny how we think that taking our problems to somebody else, it's like, oh yeah, it'll just be fixed. No, 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 it doesn't work like that. Why do we think that just bringing our baggage to someone else is going to be immediately fixed?
This is a great question. I think most humans, at least here in the United States, I can't speak for other parts of the world, particularly in impoverished countries, but here in the United States, we've adopted a belief that chemistry equals relationship success. So the more intense the chemistry is, the happier, the good, the feel good of lust and limerence and dopamine, and testosterone and estrogen and oxytocin, all those feel good chemicals, we believe is love. And because we
Mm.
believe that this is love, we enter into a relationship in many cases with somebody who's actually incompatible with us. That's one thing. But the other challenge is most humans haven't done enough work to develop the skills to be in a relationship. And I'm going to tell you something. Being in a relationship is no different than learning how to play a piano or learning how to play a guitar. It's a skill. And we have this fantasy that just because we breathe and we go to the bathroom and we put on our pants one leg at a time, that somehow we're good at this skill. Most of us haven't even been taught good relationship skills and having the emotional maturity enough to be in relationship. And here's the kicker. Most humans believe that they're the exception, not the rule. So when I say this, somebody listening to this or watching this go, well, I'm good at this. No, you are the rule. You're not the exception.
Yeah, that's true. We're not fully taught these things, but
Yeah.
we think, oh, we can take care of ourselves in the dailies. Yeah, sure, let's just get into a serious relationship thinking it's going to work out, but it does take a lot of work. What's your opinion on the generation that we currently live in, which I'm sure you've heard is like the situationship generation?
Well, I think, well, quite frankly, casual relationships, situationships, hooking up, and friends with benefits now exceeds the number of serious relationships, at least I believe, in the United States. So when
Yeah.
I think of serious, I think of marriage or living together as serious, or at least moving towards either you're as a relationship, you're moving towards one of those two modalities of living together or marriage. Okay. So casual relationships, out as situationships, friends with benefits, and hookups exceed those serious relationships. Why? Because we humans all want, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, companionship, connection, and sex. But we don't need commitment to have companionship, connection, and sex. We don't need much of a commitment. I mean, for sex, maybe monogamy is agreed upon or exclusivity, but no real commitment is needed to have sex. So it's easier to end up in one of those other relationships because so many people are gun shy because they've been hurt in the past. And if you've been hurt one, two, or three times, boy, you emotionally might be gun shy to anything serious. And so situationships, for example, outnumber serious relationships because it's almost like, this is going to be a crude analogy, but it's like renting a car versus buying a car. You
Mhm.
can rent a car. In fact, a lot of people are going to different car dealerships and renting cars because they don't want to take the risk of purchasing something that isn't going to work.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. Because I think it's like you were saying, like if somebody gets hurt over and over, then we naturally put those walls up, and we
Yeah.
don't want to be emotionally available for somebody who has gone through that. How can they learn to be more emotionally available if they want to be in a committed, serious relationship?
Well, I'm going to answer that question two-pronged way. So, first off, I think it's really important to recognize whether or not you are dateable. Okay, I'm going to
Mhm.
use the word dateable. In other words, you've done some introspective work, you've done some healing of your childhood wounds or adult traumas, you've done some work, and you are doing work to heal. One of the benefits of that is you can become more aware of your feelings and your needs in a relationship. So, once you begin to do the work, you start to recognize what your needs are in relationship. In addition, if you do group therapy or work with a coach or therapist, that experience will start to help you in improving your communication skills in a relationship. So, first is start to become effectively date ready or dateable, if you will. Now, the question is, given that 65% of all new relationships are happening through our devices now, in other words, through dating apps and social media and that sort of thing, the question is, okay, if I'm dateable, is the person sitting across from me dateable?
Yeah.
And what I mean by dateable, are they capable of being in a significant relationship? And this is where I'm a big proponent of encouraging people to ask radically honest questions as early as possible in the dating marketplace. In other words, start operating from a place of being curious, start being inquisitive, ask deeper questions early on. And you're probably going, but Jonathan, that's going to sound like an interview, and you shouldn't interview someone on a date. I disagree. We should interrogate people on a date. Now, I'm saying that with a tongue in cheek. What is an interrogation? Interrogation is about getting to the truth. It's about actively listening. It's about paying attention to body language. It's asking open ended questions. It's asking about their past relationships. I know the word is a complete turnoff, but the idea of it is to be curious about the other person beyond the surface level of dating, which today's dating is like this. How's your day going? Did you have a good day? I hope you had a good day. They're texting each other about their day instead of actually getting to know another human being. So, one, to answer your question, is to be dateable, but then determine, is this other person dateable before you really embark on the chemical bandwagon of getting to know someone.
I like how you say to just ask as many questions as you can, because at the same time, if that person doesn't have the same values or the same goals, then why would you waste your time in it?
Yeah.
Ask those questions right away. What are three of your favorite questions that you love to ask right up front, like in the first date or two?
You brought up values, which I think the best question to ask about values is politics and religion. Those should be two. Now, some people will say, don't ask politics. I'm like, to me, I believe that the more entrenched we are in our politics or our belief of something greater gives us a sense of a person's values. Just to give you a crude example, here in the United States, I highly doubt somebody who would die on the sword for Donald Trump is going to get along with someone who die on the sword for Kamala Harris in our most recent election. As an example, if two people have gigantically opposing political views, they probably have value differences. And the same is true for religion as well. So I would ask about that just purely to get, it will just give you a little window in a person's values. Okay. I think one of the most important questions is to find out about a person's past relationship
Mm.
experiences. I think a great question to ask someone, does anyone believe they're in a relationship with you right now? Although I think that's a tricky question because it's worded in such a way that a person could still be disingenuous in asking the question. But I would find out when their last relationship ended, why did it end, who ended it, those types of things, because that'll give you insight into a person's capacity to be in a relationship. I also think one of the most important questions to ask is, what are you looking for in a relationship? What does a relationship look like for you? What does commitment look like for you? And how committed are you to commitment? Like, I know I just rattled that off quickly, but how committed are you to wanting a committed relationship? These deeper questions, I think they can be asked before you ever go on a first date with somebody to just see if you're in alignment with one another. So then when you're on a date, you can actually enjoy each other's company because you've realized you're on the same page.
That's all great advice. And I don't think they're too interrogating because they're really just starting with the basics. Yeah, they're deep questions, but they're also on the basic scale as well. What do you value? What is your politics view? Last relationship, I think that's a really important one. And if there is a current relationship, that's also very important. I think it can be worded differently as well.
Yeah.
But I saw one of your videos earlier on, and you were talking about the avoidant type. Can you talk a
Okay.
little bit about the avoidant type?
Sure. I want to say something. But I want to go back to something
Yeah.
you said. And I want to acknowledge this. You know, it's interesting. The questions I just rattled off, those half a dozen or so questions, those are basics. Like
Yeah.
it's funny because you'll talk to people and say, oh, just treat a date like you were just meeting somebody for coffee, make it benign. And I'm like, no, the deep questions are really those are the easy questions. It should be the basics. I have to write that down, basics. I never looked at it that way. So you asked about avoidant. For those who are listening to this concept for the first time, if you're not familiar with something known as love attachment style,
Mm.
I would Google it right now, or at least write it down and then Google it later, excuse me. Love attachment style. And the way humans attach to other human beings is either in a secure way or an insecure way. Now, secure obviously is another word for healthy way. Insecure would be an unhealthy way. And sadly, most humans attach to one another in an insecure way. And within
Mm.
insecure attachment, there's known as anxious, preoccupied, dismissive avoidant, or fearful avoidant. And you just asked about avoidant. Avoidant people are most likely, they're not dependent upon relationship the way an anxious person. An anxious person is a bit codependent, and an avoidant is usually counterdependent. In other words, they don't depend on someone else to get their needs met. And within that is dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant. And if you peel the onion to the avoidance, they have a gigantic trauma centered around abandonment in most cases. And anxious people have a wound centered around rejection.
Mm.
So those are, I mean, and I'm giving you the Cliff Note version of this, but the core wound the person is experiencing is usually abandonment or rejection. And then they attach to another person temporarily to fill those voids, but it's temporary unless they choose to do individual work. Oh, and by the way, usually the avoidant person attracts the anxious. That's where opposites attract, or polarity. That's usually the case. Anxious attracts avoidant, avoidant attracts anxious.
Thank you for explaining those. I think those are really great core things to know and tips to keep in mind. I'm sure you're familiar with like the five love languages. Is that
Yes.
similar with like the five love languages, or is that also something you incorporate into your coaching?
Well, the five love languages is more how we give and receive love,
Mm.
or at least the way we've been taught to give or receive love. There is a correlation to that love attachment style. It's one is how we give and receive love, and one is how we attach to another human being. And to the extent that I talk about this in my coaching, it's something I talk about frequently in my coaching. And the five love languages, which you brought up, is just a recognition of how we receive it or how we give it for the most part.
That's very helpful. So, like the first one, you were talking about how people attach to each other, whether it's
Yeah.
avoidant or the anxious. And then the five love languages is how those people in the relationship receive and give love. So, that's very helpful.
Yeah. Anxious people oftentimes need words so they can feel validated. Avoidant tend to have physical touch or actions as the way they give and receive love. Now, I'm generalizing here. This is not an absolute, it's just my anecdotal observation of people. I think the most important thing that to get out of this conversation, though, and it's something I'd like to address, is that we humans naively go into relationship. We have this fantasy that, as I said earlier, chemistry equals relationship success without understanding the basics of what it takes to make a healthy relationship. So I'm a big proponent of humans reading the books. There's all these books behind me, and there's libraries of them about how to create a healthy relationship with someone. And instead of dating ambivalently or just the entertainment of one another, I'm here to encourage intentional way of getting to know another human being, being intentional about it, and connecting with somebody who's also intentional instead of this fairy tale, Cinderella way people navigate dating and relationships.
I like how you worded that intentional dating. So, when you're working with the client, what are the first couple things that you recommend for them to start dating with intention?
Well, this is a great question. One of the exercises in my boot camp that I have for clients is to look beyond the surface of what we look at. Like, for example, on dating apps, it's how old are they? How tall are they? What's their body type? What do they do for a living? Their politics and religion. Those are all important filters. But what's below that, what's below the iceberg, if you will, is, does this person share the same values with me? Is the lifestyle compatible with one another, and that emotional maturity? So, one is helping a client get really crystal clear on who is compatible with them. Next is developing the questions to ask in the early stage of dating to determine compatibility, but more importantly, to determine the emotional maturity of this human being. And sadly, we have a radically dysfunctional emotional IQ out in the world today. I mean, most humans have very weak emotional IQ.
Mhm.
So doesn't mean that they don't pay their bills on time, and doesn't mean that they might not have a 180 IQ. But I'm talking, this is requires some investigation. So one of the exercises I do is how to gauge a man's emotional maturity through a series of questions, just to get some baseline of where they might be.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. What's your opinion on self love and what does self love mean to you?
I wrote a book called What the Heck is Self Love Anyway? A
Yeah.
journey of personal development, self help, and spiritual work. So, self love to me, by the way, it's a turnoff for some people. So, let me help you. Self worth, self confidence, self reliance, self esteem, self discipline. These are all words incorporated in the word love. The way I view self love is we all have a wounded 6 year old, emotionally wounded 6 year old inside of ourselves. Now, when I say wounded, I don't mean that they necessarily had trauma or abuse, like radical trauma or abuse in childhood, but we've all got a little scared child inside of us. And self love is nurturing that scared little child inside of us, or that child that's curious and wants to, you know, touch that flame, like 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 a lighter, like to touch the flame. It's that impetuous side of us. Self love is that adult taking care of the little child inside of us. And through a series of perceptions and exercises, I've written a book about it, and it's a very basic, simplistic book. But the idea is to recognize that there is both an adult in us and there's an inner 6 year old inside of us. And it's taking care of that inner 6 year old the way you would take care of a physical 6 year old.
Yeah, that's true. No matter what our background is or how we grew up, there's always that little 6 year old self that needs some kind of attention or some kind of healing as we're growing and as we're opening ourselves up to new people and relationships. What are some things that have helped you with your self love on your journey?
Well, one of the fundamentals, it's chapter 1 in my book. It's speak your truth, do it with kindness, is
Mm.
chapter 1. We all have our truth. It doesn't mean the truth, but we have our
Mhm.
feelings, our perceptions, our needs, our wants, desires. It's all unique to ourselves. So when you're in relationship with people, I think it's important to identify your truth, particularly in the area of your needs. What do you need in life? If you're going to share your truth or your needs with another human being, do it in a kind way instead of an accusatory way. We
Mm.
we have a habit of humans speaking in a very confrontational way. I use the word violent, not necessarily, the physical aspect of it, but from an emotional aspect, from a place of fear instead of coming from the heart. So that's one of the fundamental values within self-love, is to speak your truth, speak about what your needs are, but just do it in a kind way.
That's really true. I like how you said that, though. Just speak your truth, because I think even a lot of times, whether we're growing up and we're getting into relationships, whether it's romantic relationships with friends, coworkers, a lot of times we're afraid to speak our truth because we're afraid of being judged, or we're afraid of somebody not liking us. How can we overcome that fear of people pleasing and trying to be liked by everybody, when in reality we're trying to be building our own path and finding people that align with who we are, not the image that we're putting out there?
This is another good question. So here's the thing I want to share about speaking your truth. Our truth isn't necessarily well, we all have judgments towards other human beings, and we can have perceptions and opinion about others. When I talk about speaking our truth, I'm talking about not how we feel about other human beings, because oftentimes it's a judgment, it's a projection. I'm just talking about one's own needs, wants, and desires. Okay, because I don't think it's very kind to criticize someone else under the guise, this is my truth, okay? Or, I don't think it's kind to do that, okay? To judge, criticize, and in many ways it shows up as contempt. So, one of the things I invite everybody to do is identify what your needs are, like particularly in romantic relationship. But what do you need out of a romantic relationship? Do you need reciprocity? Do you need charity? Do you need teamwork? Like, what are your needs in a relationship? Do you need validation? Do you need regular communication? Do you need a text message in the morning, afternoon, the evening? And just simply identify what your needs are and express it to the person you're with. But you do it in the form of a request, not a demand. We oftentimes, I said earlier, make requests in the form of demand. In other words, it's based on conditions. So one is identifying your needs, but more importantly, I think it's also identify what you're actually feeling. I think a
Mhm.
lot of human beings don't actually know what they're feeling. They might intellectualize their feelings, but they don't even give themselves a chance to feel their feelings and then identify what feeling they have. So, sadness, joy, contempt, depression, all of these, there's actually, here's a list of feelings. I've got a list of them right here. I don't think humans take enough time to identify what they're actually feeling and then to be able to express it. So practice identify feelings and then expressing it to people that you're with.
Such a great point, is really learning how to express your feelings. Because I think a lot of times, not everybody, but most of us, since we were kids, we were taught to just hide our feelings, or they get suppressed. And
Yeah.
whether we're in school, some kind of sport, a parent, someone is telling us, just suck it up and move on. And a lot of times we carry that into relationships, not knowing the damage that it's going to be causing. I was going into my relationship, my most recent one, and I had all my feelings suppressed. I didn't know how to feel them. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like almost numb at the point. Like, I can't even say that I was emotionally available, because I wasn't. I thought I was, but I was constantly suppressing them. So how can somebody start to feel their emotions again and start to be vulnerable with them?
It's interesting because we certainly, here again, here in the United States, and I can only speak from what I've observed, is we do stuff our emotions and our feelings. And oftentimes, particularly in the area of fear and insecurity, most of us, when we're happy, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, we'll show our happiness. But oftentimes, what we don't do is show our fears, our doubts, our insecurities.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and I can only share this from personal experience, I'm in a new relationship. It's several months old. But I started to feel fear and doubt from the very beginning. And I shared this with the person I'm with. I'm like, I'm just sharing with you. I have some past hurts. I have a hurt from my past relationship. It really hurt me deeply. And I'm feeling some fear and doubt in this relationship. Now, I'm not allowing the fear and doubt to exceed my desire to pursue a relationship, but I shared it personally with her. Now, a lot of people will tell you never ever do that. It's not very masculine. It's unattractive. It doesn't show confidence. With my partner, by having it out in the open and shining a light to it, the light of love instead of stuffing it, I'm able to move through it much better because I'm not stuffing it, waiting for it to explode. And let me just tell you, I witnessed this over and over and over again. People that don't share their true feelings in the beginning, within 90 days of a relationship, there's usually some sort of explosion that happens, and people cut and run at the time when they should be leaning in. They run away because they've been stuffing it for so long. So by the time it actually surfaces, they're already too scared to work on the relationship. Coming back to the basics that you talked about, if the basics is asking questions, then I think one of the basics we need to identify is we start in relationship afraid. Like, we should just be aware of it. We start afraid. But Jonathan, it's all feels good and it's butterflies and excitement. It's all supposed to be sunshine and rainbows and angels singing. Ah, no. We all have fear inside us. That little 6-year-old is afraid. So the basics should be to identify that instead of stuffing it. That's my opinion anyway.
I completely agree with that because I've heard this quote a couple times and it says, nobody can fake being somebody they're not for more than 3 months. And that goes back to your 90 days, the 3 months. You can pretend to be somebody for 3 months, but after 3 months, it's all going to come to surface and everything will be revealed, whether you like it or not, because how can somebody fake being somebody they're not for longer than that?
Especially if you spend regular time together, it's very hard. You know, coming back to your conversation about situationships,
Yeah.
casual relationships are oftentimes what I call part-time relationships. They see each other once or twice in a week at best, at
Okay.
best. And there's not enough consistency to get to know the person. So, you know, that 3 months can drag out a lot longer. But I guarantee you, if you're seeing someone on a regular basis, by the third month, the shit's going to start surfacing.
That's so true. So, going back to what you just said, to bounce off of it, when you're starting a new relationship with someone, what is a healthy amount of times to be seeing each other a week?
Well, I believe the minute two people decide that they're going to explore a relationship, usually which is at the time they decide to have physical intimacy,
Hmm.
I'm a big believer that you spend on average of 3 or 4 days and nights a week together,
Okay.
doing shared activities, hobbies, mutual interest, spending time with family and friends, traveling together, teamwork, building skills both in your personal and your professional life. Again, intimacy, both physical and emotional intimacy. I would say once two people begin to have physical intimacy together, if you want to build a relationship, you're going to need to see each other at least 3 times a week to build any consistency, and preferably 4 times a week. I think it's also good to have healthy space. Now, some of you might be going, but Jonathan, I'm in a long distance relationship. I can't do that. Well, guess what? Long distance relationships rarely ever work out. So, unless you have a gigantic plan, it's just a bubble relationship. It's a nice filler temporary relationship, but it very rarely ever works out. And those people that have busy lifestyles where they can only see someone once a week, I mean, you're not going to have enough experiences to build trust seeing someone once a week. That's like going to the gym once a week. If you want to have a great physique, Going to the gym once a week isn't enough, but if you go 5 times a week, you're going to have a better physique by exercising more. I would use that analogy.
That's so true. That's great advice, though, too, because you don't want to be too excessive, but you still want to have healthy space. So I think 3 to 4 times a week is also a healthy amount. What are some early signs in a relationship of red flags or unhealthy signs?
The most common one is inconsistency or unavailability. Again, to be able to spend regular time together, you have to be available for one another. And when there's inconsistency or someone's lifestyle is busy, it's going to make it very problematic to build some level of trust. Now, when we think of red flags, we can differentiate between differences between two people or character issues. Inconsistent people, that's a character flaw. Um, when I say character flaw, I'm using it as a character issue. The person I'm in relationship with, I'm a morning person and she's a night owl. At first, that was a red flag to me because it's a difference between the two of us. Now, red flag simply means ask more questions.
Mm.
Deal breaker is deal breaker. For example, I won't be in relationship with someone who's a smoker. That's a deal breaker for me. But my girlfriend's a night owl and I'm a morning person. And at first I was a little bit taken aback by it, but now I love it because she's off asleep and I've got the morning to myself. I can journal, I can exercise, I can do what I want, but that's her choice. Red flag simply means ask questions, but deal breaker, those are value differences, oftentimes can be deal breakers. Being stuck on a past relationship, to me,
Mm.
that's a deal breaker. It could be a red flag at first, but it could turn into a deal breaker. Someone who's still married, that to me is a red flag that usually turns into a deal breaker. Those are just a few off the top of my head.
Those are all great. Thank you so much for sharing all of those. So, before we go ahead and wrap things up, is there any piece of advice that you'd want to leave the listeners with that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, well, God, we could be talking for hours right now. So I'll kind of give the most important one. Dating and relationships is not for the faint of heart. In other words, the minute we open ourselves up to another human being, it's incredibly vulnerable. Just like exercise, I mentioned before, building our emotional muscle takes work. I'm a big proponent of personal development, self help, spiritual work, and therapy to build that muscle so that when we enter into a relationship with someone and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't take us down emotionally. And most importantly, I invite people to really study relationships, purchase the books like the Gottmans. The Gottmans are excellent authors. Barbara DeAngelis, Brene Brown, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, just to name a few. Start studying what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship so you come at it with a base, a foundation to a house, like a blueprint to a house. And choose somebody who's willing, and I want to repeat this word, willing to want to build that house with you. You've got the blueprints. Now you want to build your house together. Find someone who's willing to do the work with you. And that would be my invitation for everyone going forward.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Jonathan. So, please tell us, where can people find you and where can they stay in touch with you?
Okay, well, if you're watching this broadcast or you're listening to it, my name is listed there, Jonathon Aslay. You could simply cut and paste that, put that in Google. The first thing that will come up is my YouTube channel. I invite you to watch my videos. I have a lot of videos on a variety of different things. Also, if you want to connect with me on social media, you can follow me on Instagram, you could follow me on Facebook. And if you want, you can go to my website and surf around. If you're interested in working with me, there's a button to click the coaching just to schedule a call with me to see if working with a coach is right for you.
Amazing. I will have all of that linked down in the show notes below so people can stay in touch with you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Annette.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Nourished Inside Out. I'm so thankful that you're here. Your support means so much, and I'm so excited to bring to you our very first Nourished Inside Out live virtual summit on April 26th and 27th. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, and pre-sale for tickets will be for a limited time. You can find the link in the show notes below for more information. See you there, and as always, keep growing and thriving.